Up next on The Bottom Line, as we wrap up Black History Month, two special guests pay a visit to the council. We'll talk with Montgomery County resident Mike McCurry about how he's using his past work in politics in his new career.
Progressive left have to give up something. People on the conservative right have to give up something. We have to kind of try to find some place to meet in the middle.
Local leaders and community members take part in a discussion on the issues and fears facing our faith community.
Hate is trying to create something else. They want us to cease to exist. That's what they want, and they're using every element.
Thanks for watching, everyone. I'm Susan Kenedy. As we close out the month of February and Black History Month, the council welcomed two leaders in their own right, a young woman poised to make her mark, and the oldest living member of the Tuskegee Airmen. Described as one of the biggest honors of his career, Councilmember Jawando recognized Brigadier General Charles McGee for his 30 years of service to the United States as a member of the Tuskegee Airmen.
African-American members of this council in Black History Month this year, at this time in our country, to be able to stand here with you, sir, and honor all that you've done and meant for our nation, for everyone of every creed, race, religion, age, but particularly for us as African Americans and African American men, the excellence that you have demonstrated over the course of your career, both professionally and personally. There's nothing we could say here today to honor you enough and thank you for what you went through on behalf of our country. And so thank you very much for being here.
The recognition coincided with Black History Month. Councilmember Craig Rice spent time in the Air Force and said his fellow service members recognize what the Tuskegee Airmen did to forge the way for people like himself.
Brigadier General, let me just say thank you. Because as a young man growing up whose father served in Vietnam, who ably served his country, and who was able to dream about flying airplanes, on behalf of the United States of America, I say thank you. You forged the way and made it possible for young men like me to dream about doing the same things that you did.
General McGee flew a three-war total of 409 combat missions in World War II, the Korean War, and the Vietnam War. One of the highest combat totals and longest active duty careers by any Air Force pilot in history.
But thank you so much for the recognition, and I receive it, but I am proud to stand for the more than 900 pilots and the more than 14,000 people that supported us.
The Bethesda resident recently celebrated his 100th birthday, which included a trip to the Super Bowl and Capitol Hill. He was promoted from colonel to brigadier general on February 4th.
I just thank the Lord that it happened that way, but to be able to serve the country even at a time we were told you can't do it, certainly is a value lesson that needs to be shared with all of the young people.
This American hero has lived a life that is an example and inspiration to us all. For the last several years, Craig Rice has sponsored the Council Member for a Day contest to get young people involved with the political process. The application process includes writing an essay on a public policy issue facing youth today. This year's winner, Ajo Evala, wrote about the dangers of vaping.
I always try and make sure that my young people remember that public service is a great thing.
And today, Councilmember Rice recognized the quality and creativity of her submission before she took her seat to take a stab at the legislative process.
She said, "I've witnessed empty jewel pods littered about campus and cohorts who have had the audacity to recharge their vape pens using school equipment."
Recently, I produced a documentary with the Gandhi Brigade Youth Media Council on the effects of vaping with youth, and to have this opportunity to sit on the dais and speak out about it really means a lot to me. Thank you.
A privilege of being council member for a day includes actual participation in discussion and voting. An agenda item she took part in was the historic vote to approve the appointment of the county's first equity officer, Tiffany Ward. And speaking of history, as council member for a day, Joe had the privilege of meeting and getting her photograph taken with Brigadier General Charles McGee, who took the time to speak with her after his recognition by the council.
She's our council member for a day, high school student at Northwest High School.
He told me not to let anybody tell me I couldn't do something, which is something I think not only I needed to hear, but all young people need to hear. The sky is the limit, and I know our generation is so passionate, and we're not afraid to speak out about what we believe in. And I consider myself an activist in multiple social injustice areas, so that was really empowering.
Montgomery County is full of residents who have done work on the national level. One of those people is Kensington resident Mike McCurry, who gained fame as the press secretary for a former president.
Food.
Life for Mike McCurry looks a lot different today than it did in 1994 when he was the press secretary for President Bill Clinton.
I think the president was very straightforward in his comment, and I'm not going to dignify the question.
Today, this Kensington resident is a distinguished professor of public theology at the Wesley Theological Seminary in Washington.
Liberation theology and what that is and how has it impacted the black church is obviously one of the subjects we want to get to.
McCurry is teaching his students how to bring religion and politics.
There are just some political arguments that your theology won't speak to
the public square.
Wealth of data that we had in the 2 chapters that you looked at that really defines what does American politics look like if you view it through the prism of religiosity.
He began his career in politics shortly after graduating from Princeton. Between 1981 and 1983, he was the press secretary to New York Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, and he went on to serve as the press secretary for several presidential campaigns, including the 1992 campaign of Bob Kerrey.
Interestingly, I worked against Bill Clinton in the primaries in 1992 when he ran against Bob Kerrey. So I thought, well, no way am I ever going to get a job in this administration.
But he did. Thanks to the recommendation of George Stephanopoulos, he became the spokesperson for the State Department, and in 1994 began as the press secretary for Bill Clinton, where he started the practice of televised press briefings. And I know you would inject some humor into some of your briefings, and how did that work for you, and how did you feel that was a good way of handling those situations?
Yeah, well, I had a lot of press secretary tricks. I did funny things and put a bag on my head at one point. That's a long story. And, did, humorous things. I'm not sure that would play well now because everything is live and 24/7 and you'd get called out. I don't think I could have gotten away with all my press secretary tricks.
McCurry and his family have lived in Kensington for 30 years. His children all attended Montgomery County Public Schools, and though they no longer live here, he says they still consider Montgomery County home.
Kensington has the feel of a small Midwestern town in many ways. I mean, you can walk to the bank, you can walk to the grocery store, you can, walk up and down Howard Avenue, and that, becomes kind of a way in which you really experience a real community. And it's kind of unique because here we are in metropolitan suburban Washington, but this really is in some ways kind of a small Midwestern town, which is a wonderful thing.
Much to my regret, but with my full understanding and support, Mike McCurry will be leaving us in the fall.
When McCurry left the White House in 1998, he was asked to take a role as the Sunday school director at St. Paul's United Methodist Church in Kensington, where he and his family were members.
Hello there, my name is Mike McCurry. I am a distinguished professor of public theology here at Wesley Theological Seminary.
Through that work, he caught the eye of the folks at the Wesley Theological Seminary, where he eventually got his master's in theology and then became a member of the faculty.
So I'm there now directing a program in public theology, as we call it, but it's really about how do people of faith respond to things in the public square, politics, governance.
And how does he do that? By using the church, where people come together to worship but may have different political values, to introduce a dialogue that is a bit more considerate.
we question the motive and character of people that we disagree with before we actually hear them and listen to them.
His experience at the White House taught him that making decisions wasn't just about political combat and political theater.
I remember after one of my briefings at the White House one day, Britt Hume, who's someone I really like a lot, he was then an ABC correspondent for the White House, but he came up to me and he said, you know, you're the most political person we've ever heard standing at that podium in the White House. And I thought about that a lot, and I said, you know, he's got a point.
But he says today we have what he calls confirmation bias, where people gravitate to the sources of information that are aligned with their beliefs, which presents a big challenge as we move ahead and make decisions.
We have to recreate a new vocabulary of civil discourse that's more reflective of who we are as American people.
Do you have hope that we can become civil again? Is that something that you see as a possibility?
I do. I mean, I think, you know, I'm an optimist on that. I mean, I think there are people who sort of say the kind of very vitriolic politics and the pugilistic environment in which we're in, that's not good for us. We need to have people who are kind of like saying, let's come and reason together and figure out the right way to move forward and define what a common good is. And that means that, you know, people on the progressive left have to give up something, people on the conservative right have to give up something. We have to kind of try to find some place to meet in the middle. And I think that is the real fundamental question. Growing public acceptance of the idea of gay marriage, and then actually a hardening of views on abortion and right to choose.
In the meantime, this Montgomery County resident will continue in his quest to create more conversation that begins with respect and tolerance. Over the past few years, the number of criminal incidents against the faith community has been on the rise. Recently, council members held a forum to discuss keeping Montgomery County's places of worship safe. The town hall was organized by Councilmember Andrew Friedson, Council President Sidney Katz, and Councilmember Gabe Albornoz. Councilmember Will Jawando, the Reverend Mansfield Caseman, and Police Chief Marcus Jones were also part of the discussion. Friedson said he wanted to hear from religious leaders and community members about what they are experiencing in their houses of faith and how the county council can help ensure the safety of their worshipers.
We know that an attack against one community is an attack against all communities, an attack against one faith is an attack against all faith, and assault against anyone in our community is an assault against everyone in our community. That's why we've joined here tonight.
Rabbi Gary Pokras told the audience he has seen a rise in anti-Semitism and that the recent attack at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh has stoked fears. He invited county police to stop by any time during their shift.
I would also ask if it is at all possible not only to have your patrol cars come and do their paperwork in our parking lot during services, but any time of week.
Hate is trying to create something else. They want us to cease to exist. That's what they want, and they're using every element.
So when the rise of Islamophobia happens, there's genuine fear in the children, and as parents sometimes we're helpless because we don't know how to reassure them. I can't make that promise.
Residents also spoke of the need for more security in their houses of worship and the challenge funding that protection presents.
We was fortunate to get a security grant where we got lights now up there, but we still have a backlot that's kind of dark. And we get a lot of loitering and little teenagers up there drinking and stuff like that. So we feel if we get more presence of police patrolling, like my man said over there, that would help us out a whole lot.
Police Chief Marcus Jones and his officers have been working in the religious community to provide training and security assessments of facilities. He stressed the importance of always keeping the lines of communication with his officers open.
Particularly when you have large gatherings of people, it's always good for us to know and for us to be able to have our beat officers do what we call sometimes check them on patrol, just to make sure we can go through and stop by your event event or have the availability to be at your event in certain cases.
Councilmember Friedson says the council is committed to ensuring every Montgomery County resident can worship without fear, and that the council will continue to work to address our challenges.
So it's really about helping them. It's about helping them help us, which is what tonight was all about, really hearing from the community about ways that we can help. We're going to download all the information that we learned tonight, and we're going to use it to turn it into action.
Well, that does it for this edition of The Bottom Line. For County Cable Montgomery, I'm Susan Kenedy.